Hello folks, and welcome back to another episode of Monday Rules. And today is December the 7th, which means it is Pearl Harbor Day. So let's take a moment and just to think back to all the people who made the ultimate sacrifice on this day 74 years ago. Alright, so let's go over some of the honorable mentions for last week's Tier 6 Battleship Damage Challenge. In second place is Hakayim at 191,000 damage in a Fuso, followed by Le Burgond at 189,000, and then XJX at 186. In the top 5, it was closed out by Bad Wolf at 174,411 with a New Mexico. In 6th spot was Mr. Rar at 173,365 with a Warspite, the only Warspite entry in the top 10. And then this was followed by more New Mexicos by Shadow Games at 171,000, and then 3 more Fusos, Warhawk 97, Ernier, and Akit. Out of all the entries, 50% of them were done by New Mexicos, 38% were done by Fusos, and 12% by Warspites. However, out of the top 10, 60% of those entries were by Fusos. So you're probably thinking that a Fuso won the contest, right? Well, you would be incorrect because a New Mexico actually claims a top spot this week. And it's by Bratyn, who is playing on the Solomon Islands map and is up against Tier 16. This is the kind of enemy team that I think the New Mexico excels at dealing with. Anything to basically Tier 6. Tier 7, I think the New Mexico can still do okay, but I think if you go beyond that, let's say you get to Tier 8 battles, I think that's where the New Mexico really begins to struggle. And it partially struggles because the New Mexico isn't really that fast of a battleship, and I think it struggles to deal with ships that are really that much faster than it. However, assuming that you're in a Tier 6 battle against Tier 6 ships, then it's not really that big of an issue. Furthermore, I think the map this time really plays to the New Mexico's advantage because the Solomon Islands map is quite a bit smaller than a lot of the other maps, and the speed that you have isn't really going to play as big of a factor, and things like armor might just be more important. There's a reason for this because I find personally that when I'm playing on larger maps, I like the Fuso a lot more. The Fuso is a little bit faster, and that extra speed allows me to have a bit more flexibility when dealing with the enemy team and deciding what to do when to do it. The New Mexico's lack of speed sometimes takes away from its ability to react to situations, especially when, say, the enemy team is pushing a cap. With the New Mexico, sometimes it is just really hard to turn around and go back just because you might never actually get there in time. So that's why in most situations I've actually found that I prefer the Fuso more. However, on a map like the Solomon Islands, it really doesn't matter because this map is really small, and even with the slow speed of the New Mexico, it can still turn around and deal with whatever's coming towards cap. So let's take a look at what's happening in the battle right now. If you look at the team positioning, the enemy team has some ships to the south and the majority of their ships north, while Bratyn's team has most of their ships south with a few ships north. On this kind of scenario, for the enemy team or for Bratyn's team, the winning scenario most likely would be who can push through one flank while holding the other. And the reason why that most likely leads to a win is if one team can hold a flank and prevent you from pushing out, and the other side pushes out fully and comes down to engage you, then you would be taking fire from two sides, and one of those sides is most likely going to get a pretty good broadside on you. And for battleships and for cruisers, taking broadside fire really sucks because it's very easy for the enemy team to actually hit a citadel. But in the situation like this, the enemy team really isn't doing that good of a job at holding back, and that's because they have one lone battleship there who's not got a lot of support because, and I think I just realized the name is Bratyn? I wonder if that's the name. Maybe I'm just pronouncing it wrong. Okay, so let's say it's Bratyn because I think that's actually what it is. So Bratyn, I think, has and his team have taken out all of the cruiser support, so this battleship is alone. And once a battleship is alone, you're in real trouble unless you happen to be in a very well covered position showing very little of your ship. If you're out in the broad open like this ship is, you're just asking for trouble because eventually you're going to take so much fire you have to turn away. The minute you turn away, you expose the broadside, And the minute you give a broadside to another battleship is when you have to take a ton of damage in order just to get around. And of course there was 11,000, and that New Mexico is really, really hurting. Personally, I tend to find that the ships that go off by themselves are generally not very good, and that leads to them getting pushed out quite frequently. One of the things that I would recommend is that if you are thinking about going off and sort of holding a flank by yourself, that you know everything about how to prolong your survival. Proper armor angling, proper use of cover, proper use of your repair and damage control kits, so on and so forth. If you're in a cruiser, proper avoidance, proper minimizing of your broadside to make sure you don't give that away to the battleships easily. The enemy team cruisers really gave away their broadsides reasonably easily, and Bratyn there just made like easy mincemeat out of them. So anyways, generally speaking, if you feel like you're going to be more useful to your team in the pushing role and just helping kill off everything on one flank, then go do that instead. And you know, in a way, it's even okay to sacrifice just one flank. Have maybe 2 destroyers go there and just throw torpedoes out and just delay them while the entire rest of the team pushes through the north. Or, you know, now let's say assuming that that was from the red side perspective. If you're from the green side perspective, then, you know, have your destroyers go north, have everything else go south, and just push out quickly that way. Because as long as, essentially as long as both teams have pushed out one flank and they still maintain relatively even numbers, then the fight is still going to be a fair fight, and there's no advantage to either side for having pushed out that flank. It's only when one side's able to do a phenomenal job of holding one side and then having the other side flank does it become a bit of a rout. There were 2 things that I want to talk about. One was the early engagement against the 2 cruisers where Bratyn gets a double strike. He lands, I believe, 3 turrets worth of guns on one ship, and then spares the last one for the other damaged ship. It's actually good practice for battleships to do that sometimes, although I don't see it enough. Sometimes you have a very, very, very damaged enemy ship where you know that most likely if you can land one citadel or just a couple of good penetrations and you'll kill them, there's no point sending the entire salvo that way. You might as well just say, here's 2 turrets worth, and see if you get the kill, and send the other 2 the other way, and hopefully you can get 2 kills in essentially one salvo. It allows you to save some time, especially because battleship reloads are just so long. It allows you to save that extra little bit of time and kill maybe that extra ship. Also, if you happen to be in cruisers, wiggle, save your life by wiggling, because if you look at the cruisers that died to Bratyn, they just all kind of gave him a broadside. They kind of just sailed in a straight line and said, here, shoot me. So if you happen to be in a cruiser, just wiggle a lot. Alright, so let's take a look at what's happening in the battle right now. Bratyn's team has split into 2, with 2 cruisers heading towards the A cap, while Bratyn, another battleship, a Cleveland, are heading towards the B cap to defend it from the enemy push. Now this is actually very, very interesting, because if you try to forecast the battle and you try to predict what will happen, Bratyn's team is almost guaranteed a win if the enemy team has no ships going back to the A cap, because as long as Bratyn and another battleship and a cruiser are able to go and prevent the enemy team from capping B, while Bratyn's 2 cruisers are able to go to A and just cap it without really any kind of opposition, then it is guaranteed for Bratyn's team to win just by capping. Furthermore, if you take a look at where the enemy ships are position-wise, they're not really in all that good of a position. They've got only 1 remaining cruiser, and that cruiser has gone all the way out in front of the battleships by 2 whole squares essentially, and has basically come up against the fire from a New Mexico, a Congo, and another cruiser. And that's a really, really bad spot to be if you happen to be in a Cleveland. The Congo, maybe you can still deal with, but in New Mexico, that is just asking for trouble, because a New Mexico's salvo, even not hitting a citadel, can do excess of 10k per salvo. So a Cleveland would last 3 salvos tops, and there that Cleveland just took a nice hit from the Congo and is really not going to be in this fight for all that much longer. And by losing their last remaining cruiser, as well as having 2 destroyer captains that just don't seem to have a clue where they should be at this particular time, is going to cost the enemy team a battle. And it's pretty much at this point in time where you can already look at the battle and say, yeah, they're not winning this one. And that's because Bratyn's team, 2 cruisers on the cap, no contest except from the carriers, which really are not going to be able to prevent them from capping. while Britain's team is over here in force, 2 cruisers, 2 battleships, and they're facing off against, well, actually the Cleveland just died there, 2 destroyers and 2 battleships. And as long as Britain angles in towards the enemy battleships, there is just no way that those 2 battleships will have enough good citadel hits on Britain to kill him before his team is able to cap out. Even if the enemy destroyers are able to kill both of these battleships, that means getting to range, getting to really, really close range, and killing both battleships, they would still have to deal with the fact that both Britain's cruisers can still be resetting, and no matter what happens, they're just not going to cap fast enough to win. So this causes the enemy team to essentially start YOLOing in and just trying to do whatever they can to get a win, but it's pretty much by this time it's a lost cause. So let's look at the actual engagement here and we'll stop worrying about the strategic implications because that battle's been decided already. But on a tactical level here, Britain starts off nicely angled against the Fuso, and thereby the Fuso doesn't choose to engage him right away. So Britain's able to wait for the Fuso to fire some shots, turn the ship, get all of his guns on target, fire a salvo. The minute he has fired his salvo, Britain immediately turns his ship back into an angled state, thereby eliminating the chance of taking a return shot from the Fuso that could potentially citadel him. Britain does huge amounts of damage to that Fuso because the Fuso just continues to give him a broadside. And even after taking a 20k volley, that Fuso continues to give that broadside. Oh god. Like, the whole angling thing is really, really important if you ever intend to play Battleship. You've got to know like how and when you angle, how and when you reveal that broadside to actually get your guns to fire the massive salvo. Because if you can't get that right, it's so easy for the other battleship to absolutely wreck you. I remember at one point in time, on just one of those days, when I was playing like a tier 4 battleship, and I ran into, in a single tier 4 battleship, I ran into like 3 tier 4 battleships. And it was easy dealing with them because I was just drawing their shot when I was angled, and the minute they all fired, I just turned out and then used my entire broadside and slowly citadeled them down while they all gave me that broadside. And you can see that all of these battleships here are just inviting these huge broadside salvos from Bratyn because they're just giving that shot to him, and he's punishing them, every single one of them. That Fuso took that massive 30,000 damage volley. That New York took 10k, mostly dead. And of course there is well, pretty much no ships left on the enemy team. There's still 1 Minakaze. There is the very, very heavily damaged New York, which is going to die within the next couple of seconds, and 1 remaining aircraft carrier. In fact, if you actually paid attention to I believe the chat, at one point in time his team had already pretty much capped, and one of the ships got off and said, no, it's okay. We actually want to kill them all instead of capping. So Britain here gets off a salvo towards the Ryusho, and against carriers, as long as you aim it correctly and you get those citadel hits, do massive amounts of damage. So there we go. This brings Britain up to 187,000 damage, and that carrier is almost completely dead. There's still 1 Minakaze, but the Minakaze didn't last very long. Managed to get off a few more torpedoes and died. And so Britain here takes one, but it doesn't really matter anymore. Gets his guns back onto target and fires the last remaining salvo that he needs to finish off that Ryusho. Now I'm going to slow down right here because Britain didn't actually manage to take in the end game screenshots, didn't take any of those. So I had to depend on the damage counter in game as well as to verify it based on his profile page. And there you go, 194,804 damage, which is the top entry in the tier 6 battleship damage challenge. Congratulations, Britain. I'll be sending you some doubloons. Anyways, on to this week's challenge. This week's challenge is interesting because it's from BMW M3 GTR Lover, who says, in a battle where your bottom tier, sink as many ships of the higher tier as you can. Well, I can't exactly say sink as many ships of the higher tier as you can, but I can say do as much damage as you can when you're the bottom tier in a high tier battle. So here's what is going to happen. Play either tier 6 or tier 7 battleship. So that could be the Fuso, the New Mexico, the Warspite, the Nagato, or the Colorado. Play any of those ships. And if you're in the tier 6s, you're in a tier 8 battle. If you're in the tier 7s, a tier 9 battle. and in any of those battles, do the highest amount of damage possible. And let's see which ships fare well when dealing with higher tier competition. There are no other restrictions, all damage applies, ramming, secondaries, everything else applies. No restrictions on consumables. Good luck, have fun, and remember, Monday rules.